Tim Lambesis. At one point, Tim Lambesis was the frontman of a powerhouse metal band called As I Lay Dying. Fans praised his wild performances and deep philosophical lyrics. His band had sold hundreds of thousands of records, and he was seen as thoughtful, driven, and even spiritual. From the outside, he seemed like the kind of artist who used heavy music as a way to wrestle with life's struggles and deep feelings. But what fans didn't know was that behind that energy on stage, something very different was happening off stage. Something that didn't match the man they thought they admired. As the band gained popularity, Lambesis' personal beliefs began to shift. Quietly at first, then it became a lot more obvious. He went from promoting faith-based values to openly questioning them, but that wasn't what shocked people the most. What truly had his fan base bothered was the news that hit headlines in 2013, news that didn't sound real at first. Lambesis had been arrested in a sting operation that basically felt like a scene from a movie. The man who had once written lyrics about struggle and redemption was now facing accusations that made people question everything they thought they knew about him. After serving time, Lambesis eventually returned to the public eye. He apologized, seemed remorseful, and tried to explain the mental state he was in during those dark years. Some people accepted it, but others couldn't. What makes his story stick isn't just what happened, it's how completely it shattered the illusion fans had built around him. It left people wondering, how much of what we see in public figures is real, and how much is just a mask? In Tim Lambesis' case, the gap between a musician's stage persona and private choices was wide, and the fans of his music still talk about it today. Ian Watkins. At the peak of his career, Ian Watkins looked like the perfect rock frontman. He was stylish and charismatic, with a voice that millions of people adored. As the lead singer of Lost Prophets, he had a huge influence on the sound of early 2000s alternative rock. The band had an impressive success, packing stadiums and topping the charts. Fans saw him as edgy but polished, dark but cool. His lyrics were emotional, sometimes intense, but always felt personal, and that made his eventual fall all the more disturbing because what the world discovered years later was absolutely unthinkable. When the truth was revealed, it didn't feel real at first. The details were so shocking and disturbing that people assumed it had to be exaggerated, but it wasn't. The charges that surfaced weren't about arrogance, addiction, or anger issues, which were the usual pitfalls of fame. He was accused of not one or two, but multiple immoral offenses involving babies and children. Watkins was sentenced to 29 years in prison, with an additional 6 years on extended license, meaning he must serve at least 2/3 of the sentence before even being considered for release. 2 female co-defendants, the mothers of some of the children involved, were also convicted. The judge called the case one of the most horrifying cases ever seen in a British courtroom. His conviction didn't just end his career, it completely destroyed the legacy of everything he had been part of. Lost Prophets disbanded immediately. Albums were pulled. Radio stations dropped their songs overnight. Fans felt betrayed, to say the least. The same man who stood in front of crowds with so much passion, who once looked like a voice for youth and emotion, was capable of hiding such darkness. Gary Glitter. In the 1970s, Gary Glitter was a glam rock icon. He wore sparkly jumpsuits, stomped across stages, and filled arenas with anthems that felt larger than life. Songs like Rock and Roll and Part 2 made him a staple of sporting events and pop culture for decades. To many fans, he was the clear definition of wild, carefree fun. They adored him and put him on a pedestal, but as the years passed and his spotlight dimmed, a different story began to surface. The first serious signs came in the late 1990s when Gary Glitter was arrested for possessing immoral pictures of children. That alone shocked the public, but what followed made it worse, much worse. After serving time in the UK, he left the country, so his next arrests happened abroad. In countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, he was accused and later convicted of immoral activities with children. Clearly, it was a pattern for him, as it had exceeded being a one-time scandal. When news of the succeeding arrests got out, it became clear that the man once seen as a flamboyant entertainer had been living a secret life that exploited the most vulnerable. Public reaction was very quick. His music was removed from movie soundtracks and sports stadiums. The legacy he'd built for decades crumbled in weeks. Gary Glitter's fall isn't just about criminal behavior. It's also about how long fame can shield anyone from scrutiny, and it isn't very long. Varg Vikernes. In the early 90s, Varg Vikernes became one of the most infamous names in its history. He was part of a powerful underground wave of musicians in Norway that pushed boundaries musically, visually, and ideologically. He performed under the one-man project Burzum, creating haunting tracks that felt immersive and hypnotic. But what started as a new sound in extreme metal quickly veered into something far more disturbing, because Vikernes wasn't just experimenting with music, he was turning ideology into action. In 1993, Varg was arrested and later convicted for taking the life of fellow musician Euronymous, guitarist of the band Mayhem. The case shook Norway. The two had been known for their involvement in the same black metal circle, but personal tensions worsened until it became violent. Varg claimed it was self-defense, but the court didn't buy it. Alongside the criminal charge, he was also convicted for burning down several historic churches, acts he saw as statements against Christianity in Norway. With these crimes, Varg became very well known, not just in music headlines, but in courtrooms and news broadcasts worldwide. While serving his sentence, Vikernes continued writing books and blogs. He even released music from prison. After his release, he moved to France, but he remained controversial because of his open support for extremist views, including racism, nationalism, and anti-Semitism. He's been banned from YouTube and other platforms due to his content, and his name is now more associated with ideology than music. Phil Spector. Phil Spector was a music producer and a legend. In the 1960s, he invented the wall of sound, a revolutionary way of layering instruments that turned ordinary pop songs into emotional masterpieces. He worked with artists like the Ronettes, the Beatles, Tina Turner, and the Righteous Brothers, creating hits that made history in popular music. People called him a genius, and for a while, he lived like one. He had lavish mansions, a mysterious personality, and creativity that blurred the line between brilliance and madness. But behind the studio magic and the awards, Phil Spector was becoming a man many described as paranoid, controlling, and dangerously unstable. As the years passed, his work slowed down, and his public image started to change. Stories began to circulate about him being armed, threatening people, and exhibiting strange behaviors in his sprawling California home. He became a recluse, rarely seen, but when he was, it was often in disturbing contexts. Then in 2003, a woman named Lana Clarkson was found dead in his home. Spector claimed it was an accident, that she had taken her own life, but the evidence didn't line up. Witnesses spoke of Spector's violent outbursts, especially around women. To make matters worse for him, there were patterns. Past girlfriends came forward to testify against him. The trial became a media storm, and for the first time, the world began to see the producer not as a creative genius, but as a very troubled man hiding behind fame and power. In 2009, after a long legal process and a retrial, Phil Spector was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. It was one of the most shocking downfalls in music history, not just because of the crime, but because of how long he had managed to operate without serious consequences. The man who once stood behind the biggest voices in music ended up behind bars, silent, with only his past and the weight of his actions left behind. Phil Spector eventually died in prison in 2021, but his legacy is still split in two. On one side is the music with the unforgettable songs, sonic innovation, and cultural impact. On the other side is the truth that he was a dangerous, erratic man who went beyond manipulating instruments to manipulating people. Charles Manson. Charles Manson was never a chart-topping musician, but he desperately wanted to be. In the late 1960s, just as the counterculture was peaking, Manson was trying to make a name for himself in the California music industry. He had good songs and a typical musician's charm, the kind that drew people in and made them listen. He also mingled with artists and producers, including members of the Beach Boys. In fact, one of his songs was reworked and recorded by the band, although they changed the lyrics and never gave him credit. That got Manson very upset, but this anger soon turned into something much darker, because while he was chasing success in the music industry, Manson was also creating a cult. Manson called it the Family, and it was a group of mostly young women and men who saw him as a prophet and a god. He preached a strange mix of music, mysticism, and race war fantasies, often twisting Beatles lyrics and biblical references into his own paranoid worldview. At this point, the line between performance and manipulation had blurred completely. Manson played songs on his guitar late into the night to lull his followers into a trance. To them, he was part guru, part rock star, but in truth, he was orchestrating something terrifying. He believed he could start an apocalyptic race war, what he called helter-skelter, and somehow rise to power through the chaos. In 1969, the world found out just how far Manson's influence had gone. Under his command, several members of the Manson family brutally murdered actress Sharon Tate and 6 others over 2 nights in Los Angeles. Manson didn't physically commit the murders, but he masterminded them. He manipulated his followers into committing the crimes, and that was enough to earn him a life sentence. When he was arrested, he was seen as the failed musician who had become the face of cult-driven horror. Even behind bars, Manson never let go of his strange grip on attention. He gave interviews, made unsettling statements, and even released music from prison. Some of his recordings are still accessible on the internet, not because of their sound, but because of who made them. G.G. Allin. G.G. Allin was chaos personified. Emerging in the late 70s and gaining notoriety in the 80s and 90s, he performed punk rock that was raw, violent, and often completely unfiltered. His lyrics were aggressive and disturbing, filled with themes that most artists wouldn't dare put in their music. Apart from his daring lyrics, G.G. Allin was also infamous for live performances that often ended in blood, broken bottles, and arrests. His shows couldn't be called concerts. They were basically riots in real time. Fans either saw him as a brutally honest outsider challenging society, or as someone completely out of control and dangerous. He was known to have no boundaries both on and off stage. He even promised that one day he would die during a performance, and he wasn't joking. He viewed his life as a kind of living performance art, where destruction and self-harm were just as much a part of the act as his music. To some underground circles, he was a cult figure, but to most, he was a walking nightmare, proof of what can happen when shock becomes more important than substance. Gigi's personal life was just as chaotic. He was arrested countless times for harming people, indecent exposure, and destruction of property. His interviews were always filled with rage, nihilism, and defiance. He claimed he didn't want to be loved. Instead, he wanted to disgust, provoke, and burn everything around him. For that reason, even some of the most hardcore punk fans kept their distance from both him and his music. Then, in 1993, G.G. Allin died of a heroin overdose after one of his typically chaotic performances. It wasn't on stage like he had claimed, but the symbolism still felt disturbingly fitting. Today, he is regarded as one of the most extreme artists in music history. Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon was one of the most talented drummers of his generation. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he played with some of rock's biggest names, including bands like Derek and the Dominoes, alongside legends like Eric Clapton. He even had sessions with the Rolling Stones and George Harrison. Gordon's rhythm was precise but soulful, able to drive a song forward or add some soothing calmness. Musicians highly respected him, and fans loved the music he helped create, but behind the drum kit, Jim Gordon was quietly battling a hidden storm. As he continued to rise in his career, Gordon's mental health declined. Little did fans know that he was struggling with schizophrenia, and the pressures of fame gave him trouble coping with his illness. His symptoms worsened over time, leading to paranoia and long episodes of confusion. His friends and bandmates continued to notice something was wrong, but the stigma around mental illness back then meant he wasn't getting the help he desperately needed. Instead, his thoughts grew darker, and his grip on reality slipped further away. In 1983, tragedy struck when Jim Gordon was convicted of taking his mother's life during a psychotic episode. It was a heartbreaking and shocking moment, both for the music community and for those who knew him personally. His trial revealed the terrifying impact of untreated mental illness, and his sentence to a psychiatric hospital showed the legal system's attempt to balance justice with compassion. Despite everything, Jim Gordon's musical legacy is still alive in his drumming on songs like Layla and Let It Rain. Sadly, that legacy remains tainted by the crime he committed due to his mental illness. Thank you for watching this video. Let us know which musician's offense and true personality shocked you the most in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and share it with anyone you know who would love to see it. If you'd like to see more content like this, then subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next updates.